The question then becomes, can we fulfill our mission and have your money invested in the stock market at the same time? And I'm guessing you probably know the answer is no. Will the stock market protect your principal? No. Will the stock market give you income? No. So I think it's important to understand that if your goal is to protect your principal and get income from your portfolio, the stock market won't support your goal. And the most important thing for you to get is that this is the primary reason we're not recommending stocks for you right now, is because it doesn't support your goals, not because we don't like stocks or mutual funds. Both of these investments are great if you have 20 or 30 years and you're in the growth phase of life. But when you're in the income phase of life, they don't support your goals. Now, that being said, it is important for you to know my thoughts about the stock market, because that certainly plays a role in our big picture recommendations. And most of you know that I've been concerned about the stock market for a long time. And I'm still concerned. As a matter of fact, the longer we go without a big correction, the more concerned I become. But when you listen to the media, this is not the picture that they're painting. And what you're hearing out there is that the economy is as good as it's ever been, right? Ever stronger. Corporate profits are up. Unemployment is down. That's what's being reported. And it's not that this information is outright false, but there's a lot of misinformation out there that is really making the economy look better than it really is. And let's face it, does the media want you to think that the market is going to have a major correction? You ever watch Fox News or CNBC? Who are all the advertisers? It's all these big Wall Street firms. The firms that primarily sell stocks and mutual funds. Let me ask you, does your stockbroker want you to think that stocks are going to go down? Do mutual fund companies want you to think that the market's going to have a major correction? Then it kind of goes to say that the media, who are funded by these large firms, also don't want you to think the market's going to have any problems. I mean, they'd be shooting themselves in the foot if all of their reporting was contrary to the advertiser's interest. Therefore, the information you're getting through the media is biased. It's just important to recognize that. You know, a couple years ago, I was interviewed on CNBC's Worldwide Exchange. I flew out to their studio in New York, and the day before, they asked me for my notes. And I guess if you're going to be speaking to 300 million plus international viewers, they probably want to have an idea what you're going to say. And within 30 seconds after I sent them my notes, they called me up, and the first words out of her mouth is, "You can't say that." And what they didn't want me to say is that I believe the next time the market crashes, it could be worse than 2008. So I know firsthand that their content is biased because I've been censored. But it kind of makes sense, because what if all the professionals get on TV and say the market's going to crash? What's going to happen? It's going to become a self-fulfilling prophecy. So they don't want you to have this information. That just means that what you're getting, though, is biased, and you have to be aware of that. That being said, I've been expecting a major correction for a long time, and it hasn't happened yet. And I've had to look in the mirror and say, why not? What am I missing? Why has it not happened yet? And I'm not going to get into all the details as to why I think a market correction should have already happened. I've recorded videos on YouTube about that, so when you go to our YouTube channel, just watch that. Watch one or two of the videos. Talked about that a lot. But I do want to talk about why this inevitable correction has been so elusive and just seems to be defying gravity. The reason? I believe it's because much of this recovery has been built on an artificial foundation. Is my microphone not loud enough? Is anyone having a hard time hearing me back there? Yeah, a little bit louder. Wait, am I loud? Test, 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 test. Louder, up. How's this sound? A little better? Should I start over? Welcome to our 6th annual Client Appreciation event. What that does do is this, though. And yes, there's water in here. They say the number one fear is most people is public speaking, right? And the number 2 fear is dying. So I've accomplished the first one. I've overcome the fear of the first one, at least. The reason I believe that this elusive correction has been defying gravity for so long is because Much of this recovery has been built on an artificial foundation. And I believe that the Federal Reserve has been mostly responsible for this by keeping rates low for such a long period of time. It really all boils back to low interest rates. I want to spend a few minutes talking about why that is. Let's go back to 2008. As the market was melting down, the Feds had lowered their rates down to zero, and it didn't stop the crash. So they pulled another tool out of the toolbox, a tool called quantitative easing, or QE. And QE is just a fancy word for printing money. And because rates were so low, consumers, including corporations, could borrow money at virtually no cost. And you've probably heard the term free money. And if consumers could get this free money, they'd spend it. And if they spent it, it would increase corporate revenues. And if it increased corporate revenues, it would increase corporate profits. And if it increased corporate profits, then it would cause their stock price to become more attractive. And more attractive stock prices would entice investors to begin buying stocks again. And if investors across the board began buying stocks again, then the market crash would stop. And that was the whole point of quantitative easing, was to stop the market crash. But it was artificial. Printing money and inserting it into the economy is artificial. It messes with the normal booms and busts and the cycles that all economies must go through to remain healthy. And I think it's even arguable as to whether quantitative easing even stopped the crash, or whether it had already just run its normal cycle and would have ended anyway. No one knows for sure. But what we do know for sure is that giving out free money put this country into debt. A lot of debt. The Feds went through 4 rounds of quantitative easing. And because of this, our country has gone into more debt in the last 10 years than we had in the entire previous history of this country. And we're over $21 trillion in debt. And your kids and grandkids are going to have to pay it back. And they'll do this through higher taxes and through benefit cuts, or a combination of each. But the beginning of this recovery began with the artificial stimulus of quantitative easing. But it didn't end there. There are many other ways in which the government and media distort the true reality of our economy just to make it look better than it is. For example, let's talk about unemployment and inflation. The Bureau of Labor Statistics is reporting the unemployment rate to be 3.7%. And this is a number that everybody focuses on. But guess what? This number doesn't include certain classes of people. There are a lot of millennials out there that are just now, that generation is just now graduating high school and getting into their mid-30s or so. And a lot of them are graduating college, and they've never had a job, and they can't get a job. But guess what? Because they've never had one, they don't count in that 3.7% unemployment stat. They're not counted. On the other end of the spectrum, there are many pre-retirees who are 55 or 60 that were kind of forced into retirement. Some of you are here. They'd still like to work, but they can't find a job. Guess what? These people are not counted in the unemployment stats. But get this. If you lost your job and you got on unemployment and you exhausted all of your benefits, you realize that once you get your last check, you're no longer counted in that 3.7% unemployment statistic. As far as the government's concerned, you're no longer unemployed. You don't have a job, no paycheck, but you're no longer unemployed as far as the government's concerned. You don't count in that 3.7%. So when you take all this into consideration, is the unemployment rate, is that really a true number, or is it fair to say that it's artificial? Of course. By excluding all the people we just talked about, the government's artificially manufactured a 3.7% unemployment rate. But when you factor all the people in that we just discussed, really the true unemployment and underemployment rate, I believe, is closer into the double-digit range. Artificial. Let's talk about inflation for a few minutes. The inflation figures that are being reported to us are now in excess of 2%. But this is based on the Consumer Price Index, the CPI. But is the CPI really a true measure of inflation? You realize that there are certain items that the CPI doesn't even take into consideration, like energy products, like taxes, like food. The CPI doesn't count food in its calculations. Food prices can go through the roof, but it doesn't affect the CPI numbers. But if the CPI number doesn't count food, how can it be a true measure of inflation? The answer is I don't believe it can. But what this does is it keeps the reported inflation rate artificially low. But have you ever wondered why the government would want to keep inflation figures low? Why don't they count food in the inflation figures? Well, there's two reasons. First, if inflation is increasing, then the Federal Reserve has to raise interest rates. Now, this increases the amount of interest that the government has to pay on its debt. And let me ask you a silly question. If you happen to owe $21 trillion on a credit card, you want interest rates to be high or about as low as they can possibly be? The answer is low. They want them to be low. So the government has manufactured an artificially low inflation rate to keep interest rates low. You realize that for every 0.25% that the Fed raises rates, it costs the government $50 billion a year in additional interest. For every 0.25%. You heard me correctly, it's $50 billion a year in additional interest. Well, just think about that for a second. This is why President Trump a couple weeks back said the Fed is crazy when they announced that they're going to stay on track to raise rates. They don't want inflation to be high because then they got to raise rates, and they don't want rates to go up. But there's another reason why the Fed wants to keep rates low, because of Social Security. Every year, Social Security recipients are supposed to receive a cost of living adjustment to stay pace with inflation, right? And for the next 15 years or so, there's going to be 10,000 new retirees starting to collect Social Security every single day. Yesterday, there were 10,000 new people filed for Social Security. Today, 10,000. Tomorrow, another 10,000 Social Security filers. And this will go on for 15 years. And by the time it's all done, there's going to be 60 million new Social Security recipients that the government has to raise cost of living adjustments for. And if the government has to increase all these checks to adjust for inflation, do they want inflation to be higher or do they want inflation to be low? Makes sense, right? But you're not hearing this out there, right? So they artificially manufacture a low inflation number by excluding items like food. And yeah, I think it's very misleading. On one hand, you've got the government promising to give you cost of living adjustments, but on the other hand, this government is determining what the inflation rate is that they're going to adjust your cost of living by. It's almost like having the fox watch the hen's nest. I think it's very misleading. So they manufacture an artificial rate to keep the benefits lower. But there's yet another reason why I believe the market has avoided a correction for the last few years. And this is the most egregious of them all. And you might have heard this term thrown around, but I'm going to guess many of you have never really thought about this. The reason? Because of stock buybacks. Last July, CNBC published an article that they titled, "Companies Buying Back Their Own Shares is the Only Thing Keeping the Stock Market Afloat Right Now." The article discusses how important stock buybacks have been in propping up the market. In the article, the author makes this statement: "Stocks right now are hanging by a thread, boosted by a bonanza of corporate buying unrivaled in market history." And CNBC is not the only one talking about this. Fortune magazine titled an article, "Why Stock Market Buybacks Should Make the Investors Nervous." Forbes wrote an article that was titled, "Why It's Raining Share Buybacks in Wall Street." The Economist has called them an addiction to corporate cocaine. Reuters has called them self-cannibalization. The Financial Times has called them an overwhelming conflict of interest. And an article that won the McKinsey Award for the best article of the year, Harvard Business Review has called them stock price manipulation. That's right, stock price manipulation. Why is it manipulation when a company buys back its own stock? Well, there's two reasons. First, it creates an artificial demand for the stock. When there's a demand for the stock prices rise. So by purchasing their own shares, a corporation creates demand for the stock, causing the share price to rise. But is this increase of the share price due to fundamental growth of the company, or is it fair to say it's artificial? It's definitely artificial. But the second reason that stock buybacks manipulate the stock price is because of the earnings per share ratio. And this is probably the most manipulative of them all. The earnings per share is a ratio that investors look at to determine how profitable a company is. The more earnings there are per share, the more revenue a company is bringing in, and presumably the more profitable. So when considering to purchase a stock, the earnings per share is a big factor to consider. And the higher the earnings per share, the more attractive the stock, and therefore the greater the demand. So higher earnings per share also increases the demand for the stock artificially. But there's two ways to increase the earnings per share: the fundamental way and the artificial way. The fundamental way is for a company to increase its earnings. The more earnings a company has, the higher the earnings per share. So as a company's earnings grow, so does its EPS. The second way, though, the artificial way, is to reduce the number of shares. When a company buys back its own shares, it takes shares out of the market while leaving the earnings the same. What this effectively does, though, is it increases the earnings per share and makes the company look like it's doing better than it is. But the company hasn't sold a new product. They haven't taken on a new subscriber, no new client. In short, they've not increased their revenue, but the earnings per share makes it look like they're doing better than they really are. And of course, this makes stock prices more attractive, which in turn creates a higher demand. But once again, it's artificial. And as CNBC suggests, it should make investors nervous. Household names like Wells Fargo, Pepsi, Google, Visa, even Lowe's have been buying back their own stocks. And let's not forget the king of stock buybacks, Apple, which bought back $43.5 billion of their own shares in the first 6 months of 2018. Apple's buybacks now have totaled over $200 billion all time. Goldman Sachs has estimated that by the end of this year, stock buybacks will have hit the $1 trillion mark. That's trillion with a T. And because of this, the stock market has been driven to record highs over the last 2 years. But the question then that's beginning to be asked is, where do the companies get all this money? The $1 trillion that's being used to buy back stock? Answer, many of them are borrowing it because the Federal Reserves have kept interest rates for so low for so long that they're borrowing it. It's a way for them to manipulate their balance sheets by borrowing money at low rate to buy back their own stock. And what this effectively does is it increases their debt while making their profitability look better than it is. But does this sound like a fundamental strategy to you? Or does it sound more artificial? But it gets worse. Here's a fact that you probably don't know. There's more. Many of the Fortune 500 companies pay their executives based on the earnings per share ratio. The higher the earnings per share, the more compensation the executives receive. Are you beginning to understand why maybe the Financial Times has called them an overwhelming conflict of interest? Let's take McDonald's, for example. Did you know that McDonald's executives depend on the earnings per share ratio for 80% of their pay? 80%. So you know they want the EPS to be high, right? And of course, this creates a massive conflict of interest between executive compensation and their fiduciary responsibilities to their shareholders. And check this out. Between 2013 and 2018, McDonald's borrowed so much money to buy back their own shares that all of the credit rating agencies across the board lowered their credit. Over that 6-year period, McDonald's debt skyrocketed 84%. They went from $14.1 billion to $25.9 billion in debt. Does that sound healthy? Big Macs aren't the only unhealthy thing on the menu, folks. But you might be saying, wait, Anthony, hang on. Stock market's done well. McDonald's is growing, right? Their stock price has done phenomenal. Just look, 2013 it was $94 a share. And now it's over $180 a share. And by the way, today, McDonald's hit a brand new record. An all-time high in the market today, McDonald's. Doesn't that mean that everything is well in Ronald McDonald land? Well, listen to these stats and then you tell me. Starting in 2013, revenue has dropped yearly from $28.1 billion to $27.4 billion to $25.4 billion and to $24.6 billion. Down, down, down. That's a decline of revenue over that half-dozen-year period of 12% during the same time that their debt increased by 84%. Are those the kind of financials that justify an increase of stock price by 91% from $94 a share to over $180 a share today? Or can we say it's probably artificially inflated? You don't have to be a financial wizard or even know anything about finances to answer that question. The Wall Street greed is back. And corporate executives are making decisions based, again, on what's right for their pocketbooks, not yours. And this is what's happening out there. You're not hearing it from mainstream media. It smells like 2007 all over again. Remember 2007 when financial institutions like Lehman Brothers and AIG created these derivatives to help their balance sheets look better? So unfortunately, that's just what's happening again, and we don't seem to learn. And it's my belief that corporate debt, along with government debt, may be the next bubble to burst and may be the cause of the next stock market decline. But when? No one knows. No one knows when, but we do know that nothing goes up forever. We also know that companies can't keep buying their own stock forever and artificially manipulating their balance sheets forever. So do you see why I say that this recovery has been based or built on an artificial foundation? Everything from the printing of money to the manipulation of unemployment rates and inflation rates, all the way to stock buybacks. It's artificial. And keep in mind, I'm not saying the economy is not doing better than it was 10 years ago. It certainly is, certainly doing better. But it's just not as rosy as everyone believes. And you know they say don't fight the Fed, but even the Fed can't keep this bull market going forever. The best they can do is delay it. And I think that's why it hasn't happened. I think they've just delayed it with low interest rates based on some of the things that we've talked about. Now, is it possible that given everything that we've talked about now, tonight, including the fact that we're in the longest cyclical bull market this country's ever seen as of August last year, breaking a record high, including the fact that the market is at still near record highs, is it possible that the market never has this major correction we've been looking for? Sure. I mean, anything's possible. But the real question we should be asking is it probable? And really, at this point, the stock market has to come down by 44% to avoid breaking several major records that it has held for over 200 years. It's possible that that happens. It's just not probable. But here's the good news. None of you have to worry about this because you're not invested in the stock market. Your money's protected. So for all of you, it really doesn't matter what the market does. You're still going to continue getting your income regardless. And this should actually give you great peace of mind, knowing that you've got your income coming in and year out. And for those of you that are spending it, then great, you're leaving your principal intact while doing so. And those of you that are not spending it, it's just getting reinvested and your portfolio is still continuing to grow. But some of you have asked about your performance. You're earning 4 or 5%, you've seen the market grow quite a bit in the last couple of years, and you're wondering if being invested for income is still the right way to go. You're looking at the grass on the other side of the fence and wondering if it's greener. Folks, listen, the grass on the other side of the fence is greener because it's artificial grass. And even artificial grass is going to wear out at some point. I'm not investing your money for this year or next. I'm not willing to gamble your retirement next egg on the slim possibility that the market breaks 200 years of records. I have you invested for the rest of your lives. And my number one goal is to help you protect your principal while keeping pace with inflation. We're not trying to help you get rich. We've never been trying to help you get rich. We want to make sure that you never go broke and have enough buying power to keep pace with inflation. And that's why we don't have you invested in the market, because it doesn't support those goals. It just so happens that we also believe there's going to be some problems with the market ahead as well. And as an aside for our younger clients, if you do have 20 years or more to invest, I believe the stock market ultimately is going to be the best place to be. But Wall Street's just going to tell you to get in regardless of where it is and just ride it out. Don't worry about it. You'll be glad you did. I'm not buying that. I would rather have you in the market at a better price. The old stock market adage is buy low and sell high. We're at record highs. If you get in the market now and you have 20 or 30 years, you'll be glad you did that. But if you wait till the market correction comes and you get in then and you wait 20 or 30 years, you'll be gladder that you did that. And that's what we're doing, is just waiting till a better time to get our younger clients back in the market. We essentially have them treading water, earning a decent rate of return, keeping pace with inflation, waiting for a better time. And as a final note, this doesn't mean that your portfolios won't hiccup when all this happens. They will. When the crash of 2008 happened, everything went down, and even income-producing portfolios hiccuped a little bit. but your income is going to remain consistent. And as long as you're living off your dividends and interest and not touching your principal, then the short-term swings of a portfolio is not going to affect you at all. It's easy to be enticed to greener pastures elsewhere, looking to the stock market over the last few years, wondering if that's where you should be. But I believe with all my heart that this would be a big mistake with the market at these levels that they're at. Please stay the course. I promise to do the best I can to protect your principal so you can enjoy your retirement and sleep well at night regardless of what the market does. Do we have a deal? I hope you know how much I care for each and every one of you. This is not just a job to me. I'm treating your money just like I'm treating my own mom's. My mom's sitting right here. She's invested the same way that all of you are, and you know I don't want to lose her principal. Love your mom. We've covered a lot in the last half hour, and if you want to watch the speech again, it'll be available on YouTube. But I would also encourage you to forward it to your friends. There's a lot of friends that don't have the information that you have. Just forward it to them and at least give them the information to be armed with. And again, I thank you for your business. I thank you for your trust. You know I don't take it lightly. I'm honored that you've allowed me in some small way to have just a small influence in your retirement. Thank you, and God bless.